Welcome, everyone. This is session number 4, our final session in this series. It's from AI reaction to learning evidence. So the first 3 sessions helped leaders move from policy to expectations to proof moves inside of assignments. But today, we're going to make the next shift. Manual proof moves are strong as a strong starting point, but they do not automatically create learning visibility across a school or even a system. So the question today is not, can a teacher ask for better evidence? The question is, can the evidence show beyond the teacher one moment and one assignment? And by the end of this session, you will leave with learning evidence as a readiness map. So this brings us to our next slide. So the core reason, this is the very core reason that this session number 4 exists. I'm forgetting my words today. I think I need another coffee. So a proof move can reveal thinking, but learning evidence only matters if it can actually be captured, interpreted, acted on, and learned from over time. If the evidence appears once and then just disappears into a comment or a conversation, a draft, or a teacher's memory, it may be valuable in that moment, but it's not yet into a system that can track it. So today we are going to map out the chain: evidence, capture, interpret, act, and finally learn. But before we build the map, let's get really clear about who is leading each part of that conversation. Thank you, everyone. Awesome. Let's get started.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks so much, Colin. Thank you, everybody. This is our 4th session in a busy summer series. Really excited to have co-founder, co-CEO Colin M.B. Cooper with all of his years in business and entrepreneur joining us, Dr. Laura Spencer with her over 25 years serving in public education, and Miss Anna Shildrick, who has internationally served as a teacher, a coach, and an innovative thinker in this world of AI. So honored to be presenting to you today. And thank you for hanging in there. We did, as Colin had mentioned, we did start this with policy. Policy is just the beginning, and this is where many districts are, right? So what does policy mean, and how is it impacting the classroom? And we spent the next 2 sessions designing proof points and then how assignments may look. And today we're talking about how things scale, right? So we all know that in education, this foundational research in Project Zero started back in 1960. This is nothing new. But the reason why it hasn't scaled at mass is because there's no accountability. And we know as leadership, what you inspect is what actually scales. So we're going to be talking a little bit about how do you make learning visibility scale in your system? The big question that we have to ask, okay, if the evidence matters and your school is actually able to get the proof point, you're able to capture that information, you're able to act on it, and you're able to learn from it consistently over time, imagine what would happen for students. So taking ownership of this work, finding the right cadence in the moment, the people to begin the mission, interpret what works in your system, what doesn't, and let's talk candidly about each organization's ability to scale this idea. Usually scale is when systems stall. They're really good at loving the great teachers that hold true to any initiative. And when you're walking around a campus, you'll know exactly those teachers that take to heart new initiatives. The challenge is the system has to own it as a whole for there to be positive change for every student in your organization. And I'm going to be handing it over to wonderful Dr. Laura Spencer to take it from here.
Thank you, Megan. So we're going to talk today about that pathway and about assignments. And I'm going to take you back to my days as an English teacher and start with what I've actually lived. So when I taught English, a lot of times, like, a student would turn in a draft. We always called all of our writing, a draft, and they turn it in. And somewhere in the middle of that, you could see their thinking as they were working through where ideas went, where sentences should fall. You'd see their thinking, like they tried something, it didn't work, so they changed it. But then when you get that final product and you grade it, somehow that thinking is gone. And it's not because I didn't notice it. It's just like there was nowhere for it to go. It got all polished and beautiful and it was submitted. And that's what we're talking about here in this slide is we're going to look at these three places and look at where the thinking shows up and then also where it isn't kept. So something has happened and we no longer can see it. What happens a lot of times is it moves, right? It moves between adults. So as we start with the idea in our brain and we work through schooling, somewhere it all gets lost and it starts to scatter. So your notes are in one place and then like PLC decisions happen somewhere else. Somebody's doing intervention and they're logging it in a different place. And so by the time the student gets all these different supports, nobody's really recorded what they've done and what has changed. And so what we're realizing is where did the learning happen? Where did the thinking change? How do we know that we've made a difference? And that's what we're going to work through today. And this isn't really a people problem. It's just a path problem. It's a bureaucracy problem. So I want you to think for a moment. You can throw it in the chat if you want to, but where do you find that this whole progression gets lost in your system? Where does it disappear when we no longer can actually see the learning evidence? So if you want to throw that in the chat, you can go ahead and do that. And I'll give you a few seconds and then we'll move on. So one of the ways that we have tackled this, and we've talked about this in previous sessions here, is switching how students respond, and then what do we do with that information? So instead of just telling a student, hey, turn in your paper on photosynthesis, or here's my math homework, we're asking students to share what they've changed, what thinking, what process has adjusted. So you can see it in this one example from a student. I changed my evidence because the first quote proved the topic, but not the claim. Right. So when you sit with that, you realize, oh my goodness, this student found their own mistake and they said why. And that's the whole ballgame. That's so much of the work that we're trying to do here at IXR is make that thinking visible, but also the change that results from that thinking. And this is where I think a lot of people got stuck is they would say, show me your thinking. And that's fabulous. But I want to see what changed as a result of that thinking. I want to see that progression of learning. So what happens with this sentence is 4 different adults in your building want access to this sentence for very different reasons. The teacher needs to know what to do on Monday, right? So they're looking at it and they're saying, okay, what do I need to adjust in my lesson? The student now gets this. That's what I was going to teach. Or maybe nobody got this except for this one student. How am I going to teach that? So that's what the teacher wants, right? They're looking at lesson plan adjustment. Then you have the PLC group. Now you have all the English teachers getting together. And they're looking to say, well, which assignments are going to produce more students to say this, right? So they're looking at a bigger whole and saying, wow, it's so amazing that Lucy wrote this. How do I make sure that there are 50 Lucys next time we do this project? So that's what they're looking for. And then it goes to the school leader, right? The principal or the building leader, whoever that is. And they're looking and saying, well, who needs more time? Which students did not turn in this sentence? And what am I going to do with those students, right? I got testing in 3 months. How am I going to get these students to also have a sentence like this? And then the district leader, who's not even at the school building, it's somewhere at an office, just getting maybe a spreadsheet of all this information and saying, well, is this a pattern that I'm seeing? Is this only happening in building A? Why isn't it happening in building B? Why is it only happening in hallway D of building A? So 4 different people looking at one sentence for completely different reasons. And all 4 of those are completely legitimate, but they're not equal in urgency, right? Because 3 of them are looking for a pattern. They're looking for sustainability. They're looking, 3 years out, how is it still going to work? And only one of them is looking at the student. And what can I do this week to enhance this opportunity, to take it deeper, to get them to keep on going? So that's what I want you to think about. And we're going to go ahead and come back to that in a little bit. But for now, we'll move on to the next slide.
And Laura, I just think what you talked about is so important. And you're looking at a system, right? So this is why oftentimes scaling is hard. And when you have people with different lenses, just feeling that moment of that one sentence and the power and how a system can easily lose the impact of that sentence can have on the individual learner themselves.
Exactly. So you have that teacher in the classroom who's trying to figure out what to do next. And if you've been in education, you know that it can be such an isolating moment, right? Teachers are sitting at their desk, they've got 100 papers in front of them or now on their screen, and they're trying to figure out what do I still have to do on Monday, right? How many of these sentences did I get from students? And so they're looking for three things. One, like it has to land somewhere. Somebody has to decide what it means, and then you have to turn that decision into a move. So three things that this teacher is doing, mainly in isolation, trying to figure out what to do to move the needle. Next slide, please. So the first one is it has to land somewhere, right? If it has no home, it has no life. So yes, this teacher has this information, but where does it go from there? And a lot of times it goes nowhere. So it has to land somewhere. What thinking showed up, right? What thinking appeared? That's the evidence. Where did it go? So again, remember I told you in the beginning, that first draft, and I'm seeing the thinking, I'm seeing the things, crossed out or moved, or I'm looking. Where did that thinking go? Who can see it? And what decision does it help someone make? That last one is the filter. So if a piece of evidence doesn't help anyone decide anything, don't capture it. Why ask the student to talk about what they're thinking, what their thinking changed if I don't plan on doing anything with it on Monday? And we see that so many times. We see the teachers who do the pre-test, but then still make all the students do the post-test. 80% of the students already knew. But as a first year teacher, I had to teach spelling. And I remember doing the pre-test and the kids would get 100%. And I was like, okay, well, I'll see you again on Friday. And they were like, well, why did I take the pre-test, right? I did nothing with the evidence. I didn't value the thinking and the learning that had taken place before I had walked into the room. So that one is the filter. If it doesn't help you, don't capture it. We're not trying to build a record here. We're trying to build something a teacher could reach for that they can use, right? This isn't about at the end of the year, I have 180 pieces of evidence. It's what am I doing tomorrow with the evidence that's right in front of me? And so if you can't answer those 4 questions, then that sentence means nothing, right? It's stuck in the ether and nobody's making progress with it. And it's such a missing and lost opportunity.
I agree with you, Laura, and thinking about the staff rooms right now and how this applies. This is something that's been tried and true for a long time, right? So these concepts you're talking about are just foundational pedagogical improvements to education. But what you're hearing teachers say consistently and bringing it back to the why we started the series is AI is here. So many teachers don't know what to do with artificial intelligence. And when the assignment looks just too polished, something that we always used as an evidence of learning for years and years and years, no longer are teachers confident that children have done the learning that the assignment was meant to build. And so these types of moments, that sentence, Laura, the ability for you to say where your thinking is, I believe is something that good teachers have always done. But when teachers are stuck in that moment of not sure what to do if a student has used artificial intelligence, this proof point, this opportunity to have them show the evidence and then do something with it, I believe, as you said, is a game changer.
And I think you led perfectly into the next slide. So let's slow down a little bit and go through this. The system can tell you that something looks like reasoning, right? So it can flag revision. I can look at different versions of something and say, oh, I've seen that some revision has happened. It can also flag transfer. Student took this concept here and applied it over here. And it can also tell you that, something was explained really well. But it really can't tell you if this was real for the students. This goes exactly like Megan's talking about, like with AI. So I can show you 2 identical reflections. I can hand you 2 of the exact same things, and one might be a breakthrough for a student, and the other might be a student who just learned to write what the teacher wanted to hear. I was notorious for that in school, right? I'd figure out what that teacher liked, what their passion was, and I would write to that, and I'd take the easy A and I'd walk out the door. And that teacher never truly knew what I valued because I could chameleon myself in any situation to make sure that I can make it through. So when we look at these, we realize that I can have these 2 things and it could be the same words and nothing in the software can tell them apart, but the teacher can. And that's the key here, right? Because the teacher has been there since the beginning. So yes, AI can give me something that is beautiful, but I'm going to know, you know what? This student has been struggling with this language barrier, and now I can see that reflection of learning. And so the key here is that the system points things out, but the teacher has to decide. That order never flips. We're not here to tell you that AI is the answer. We're here to tell you that AI can point things out so that the teacher can make better judgment calls. Goes back to that lesson planning on Monday, right? The AI says, here's what I'm noticing. I'm seeing a lot of transfer of skill, or I'm seeing a lot of transfer of concept from here to here. And then it's up to the teacher to decide. And that's why this slide says what it says, right? This is not AI detection. This is not teacher evaluation. This is not student accusation, right? We see all those things happening. What Anna's going to talk to you about is the trust piece. And she should, because if teachers experience this as being watched, it doesn't work, right? We truly value what the teacher brings to the table. So if you take one thing from this slide, it's this: the judgment has to stay with the person who loves those students, right? The AI supports, but the AI never replaces.
Thank you, Laura.
So when you look at the handout, and we're not going to take the time to do it today, but it's there. If you look on page 4, you can take one real signal from your own school and you walk through it, right? The key here is not to just fix it. I think a lot of times I don't know, I am fixer mode. I always want to just fix the things. But what I want you to do is follow it, right? Where does it appear? That moment where you're like, oh, there's the student learning right there, right? I see it here. And then where does it go? Does it disappear? Who reads it? What happens next? And then when you hit that box that you can't fill out, stop. Because that's your answer, right? That's where that progression of thinking and seeing that visible learning, that's where it's dying. If you don't immediately know, like, oh yeah, somebody's going to see it here, and then it's going to go here, that's what we're asking you to do, is to take a moment and say, where did we lose the key that showed that the student is learning? It's such an important activity. And it's funny because I think a lot of times we just assume, I'm guilty of that. Like, no, of course the teachers look at it. Of course the PLC is getting that information. Of course we're having these conversations. But that, of course, is not the answer, right? So really sit with this and find that empty box. That's the key.
And of course, when you have 175 to 180 students on your caseload, how do you manage and hold as a teacher the individual thought process of every single student on your caseload? And I think that's the challenge with visible learning over time. You can get little snippets, little pieces, Laura. You can have the system create. You have to be realistic too. You also have to understand you're working within the confines of your system. And this is, where the power of this team has come together to really work to solve the scalability problem of this. But yeah.
So last one, and this is the other thing I care about before I pass it off to Anna. Evidence without action is noise. And even worse than noise, going back to what Megan just said, it's time. It costs teachers so much time to produce evidence. And then if it's not used, it's just such a waste. I think of all the benchmark assessments I did over the years that would end up on a spreadsheet at some district leader's desk, but never back to me in terms of, hey, Laura, this is what's working really well. Or, hey, Laura, we noticed that there's this hole in this process, right? Because they were looking at patterns at the big level, but it wasn't trickling back down to me so that I could individually help my students. That's noise. What we're talking about here is using that evidence. So once that adult sees the signal, then what happens? What happens in the next few days, right? You asked the student a question. You asked them to document their thinking. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to pull students in for a quick conversation? Are you going to adjust a next assignment so that it reflects where they're at in this process? You have to look at all of that work, right? So those 4 are the acts, and that's what they are here. So you can ask, you can clarify their thinking privately. You can nudge them, send a focus prompt. Oh, interesting that you realize that, this quote supported the topic, but not the claim. So let me nudge you on that. What do you mean by that? What claim do you think it should have supported, right? You can build those small groups. I know I had 175 students and yet still found time to meet with those small groups, right? The 10 of you are having the same conversation. What might that look like if you facilitate? And then we review. Let's look at another sample. Am I seeing the same progression of ideas together, right? But the 5th thing on this slide, the tracking of the pattern, that's the different animal. That's the learn. That's what changes about your assignment design next semester, right? So yes, I'm helping the students now, but when I'm looking at that pattern, I'm also thinking ahead. What am I going to flip next time? Sometimes in October, I'd write myself post-its for the next year. Hey, next year when I teach this, I need to do this differently because this hooked them or this did not, right? Both matter. But schools tend to do the tracking and skip the actual student. We build the dashboard, but the student never notices that anything changed. So the test isn't really about whether you're collecting more data. There's always more evidence, more evidence, more evidence. But the test is really, does a student experience something different because the adult saw something true? And Anna, that's the change. So what I'm hoping now is that you can tell them whether a teacher can actually live with this process and what it looks like.
Yeah, I'm going to jump into that, but I definitely want to say something before I do. I was 30 years in the classroom, lots of different places in the world, lots of different levels, subjects. Whatever you want to say about teaching, I've done it. And everywhere I went, there was just this culture of, oh, it's because he's a good teacher. Or, yeah, but she's just really good at this. And it was like, but all students deserve, right? All students deserve to have evidence of their thinking that is going to help them in their lives as they go forward. And so I remember implementing metacognition programs. Let's get the students understanding their learning. But what we want to talk about today is how do we go from a manual working of the system to a system that can actually run and be sustained. So I want to just take a moment today to look at the teacher usability of all of this, a readiness map that only can exist if the teacher can live with it. And leaders can't build systems by asking teachers to carry more invisible labor. That is the last thing, especially with everything that is on their plates right now with new AI systems, a new way of thinking. We don't need more work. We just want to ask two practical questions. What can start manually without overwhelming teachers? And then what starts to require a system when the volume or the consistency or the follow-up really matter for the growth of that student? So we're going to have a look at...
Anna, I'm going to jump in. I also hope the leaders say, what can I take away? Because this is important. This is important. So sorry.
Yeah, and again, leaders often, like you say, they get the data and then we can make new decisions, but it doesn't always go back to the student. And this is our work. How does the student become the one in control of their learning because they can see it and they're getting this feedback that works for them? So if you look at the next slide, we're going to invite you to kind of engage in this activity where we're looking at the different steps. So we're going to ask you, choose one evidence signal of thinking that your school really, really cares about. Just one. What matters? So it could be a student explanation. It could be a revision after feedback. It could be a student sourcing out some judgment and collaborating with others on their learning. It could be transfer, taking what they've learned and transferring it to something else, or academic communication. And then we want to look at how do we trace the handoff? Where does the evidence appear? Where does it disappear? Or where does it get interpreted? So think of one piece of thinking evidence that you really care about, that matters to you, and track what happens to it. So name that evidence, trace the handoff. Where does it go? Where does it disappear? And then decide on the response. I'd like you to just think about this very simplistically. Take one signal, one evidence move, trace the path, and then see, is this something that can become a manual move? Or is this something that may require a system? And going back to what I said about a great teacher will do this, a great teacher will give time at their weekends to do these things. But if we want systems to exist, how do we make those systems work? If we look at the next slide, just some ideas of what type of evidence we might be looking for. If a student revises their work, or my thesis statement, it answered one thing, it didn't answer the other. We know that great students will say these if great teachers facilitate the space for them to do that. And then what happens after that? It may be any of these things that we're showing you on here, but try to think of one that matters to you. And then if you want to flip to the next slide, we invite you to look at pages 6 and 7 of the workbook that we've handed out to you. And page 6 is where you build that readiness map. You're building out the map. And page 7 is where you rate the readiness and you look at the guardrails. So as you're working through these, don't try to design a perfect system. Just start with reality and honestly looking at what is happening and what we can do better. Where does the evidence appear? So where do we see students thinking? Where do we see visible thinking? Who sees it? If the teacher sees it, that's amazing. If the student sees it, more amazing. If the school system sees it, and then if we sustain it, even more amazing. Who acts on it? And what would break if 5 teachers or 5 campuses tried to do the same thing? Where would the process begin to fail? So take a time to think about it and come up with one manual routine and one requirement of a system that would allow that to be sustainable. If
And
you
I
want to
love
skip,
this. I love
yeah,
this too.
go ahead.
It's focusing on good to great, right? So a lot of people are scared to confront brutal facts. And I think it's okay if your system's not even ready for this. It's okay because if you're a teacher, sometimes we're gonna talk a little about leadership coming up, but some people get stuck so much in what they can't control. So I think it's really refreshing for you to be honest. If you are a teacher from your local level, where does the system get stuck? If you're a principal, on your campus and can control your specific campus, where does it get stuck from the student, teacher, principal, district, superintendent, board level? So it's really being honest about the system you have so that when you're speaking to people and as you begin to make visibility a priority, because students need to be looking at their thinking in this time. Thinking needs to be a part of this assignment, and thinking needs to be a part of grades now because students can get those for free. So confronting those brutal facts, Anna, like you're talking about, and oftentimes as educators, we have this issue of everything needs to be perfect, or we don't give ourselves grace to change. And so I think that this exercise is not meant to be comfortable, and Anna is the queen of productive struggle. So when you're doing this honestly and you're sitting with this in front of you and your team and you're able to look at what won't work, you're then able to find ways and get people to the table that will help you find what will. But until you find ways that the system might need help, you can't really scale anything like this with sustainability.
Yeah, Megan, and I've been in so many meetings with other administrators, and there's this pressure to say everything's fine, everything's going really well. Look at the numbers. My department is going really well, and we should celebrate wins, but we should definitely have the courage. And I talk about building culture of courage in schools, not just for students, for the adults, the educators, the culture of courage to actually stop and say, oh gosh, you know what? Something's changed here. Like AI came along and a lot has changed. We need to have the courage to sit down and say, what is going on? Where can we revise? And sometimes teachers don't have the headspace, they don't have the time, or they're not supported. If you look at the next slide, this is something that I think is important, that we're looking at where does this thinking evidence appear. You're a teacher in a classroom, you can see, you can watch, you can hear the students reflecting, right? The teacher can make the comments that highlight the thinking. There are many opportunities, but thinking can also disappear very easily if the feedback that we have to give to those students is so fast it gets lost. That it's not focused on, there's no space for it in what is designed for that moment. Or if the notes are informal because there's no need for me to actually register that anywhere. Or what about if I did give the feedback and the thinking improved, but then there's nothing after that, and the child can go back to actually not showing the visible thinking. It can disappear if the support cycle isn't strong enough. And another element that we hadn't talked about is it's when something is hard to interpret. When the signal's visible, but no one or not everybody knows what that means, or we haven't actually come to an agreement of what that actually means. How do we interpret that, what we're seeing? How does that become something that we value and something that we measure? So these are the conversations that we need to be having as teams, as we're noticing that the assignments we've always had and the work that's coming in is changing because we're not noticing that thinking necessarily, as we always have been. If you'd like to skip to the next slide, this is where, I would love you to ask yourselves about the evidence that you were contemplating in this exercise, because this is a really important decision. Some things can be manual and they can begin manually. And I remember saying, do you remember that school used to be a great school and now it's not such a great school? To me, it was obvious the people who were standing in front of those students moved on and the system fell because it was those people standing at the front of the room who actually made the value. The system didn't uphold that. So we can start with manual, but when do we require a teacher? If it's one teacher, one team, one low volume evidence, a shared interpretation, and a short response time, then manual can be enough. But when the work crosses many teachers, many campuses, and evidence appears in many different places, and interpretation needs consistency, or when action must happen over time, then there's a signal there that the school needs a scalable system. So the question is not whether a school should start manually. The question is how long can a manual system remain reliable before it becomes a sustainable, effective system?
I think, Colin, this leads to you so much in the business world, leaning on your business acumen and looking at scalability of concept, right? So we hear all the time that companies will have trouble scaling when they're relying on the CEO only, right? So looking at your experience here and knowing that some things start manually with learning visibility, even just having this conversation about how do you make learning visible in your class now that AI is here and students can get answers for free? And in your experience, Colin, how would you translate this to business, knowing that this is directly correlated?
Good question. Look, it's such an important topic. A lot of people, when they look at business failures, they think it's either the lack of customers or the lack of cash flow. And in my experience, 99% now of business failures is that they haven't had the systems in behind the scenes that essentially allows it to go from being sustainable into the growth phase, into the scaling phase. And as you pointed out, often because a lot of the systems and the decisions are coming back to the CEO. So one of the things that we often look for scaling a business is there's normally 2, maybe 3 things that a CEO should handle. The rest of it is building a good quality team, SOPs, so standard operating procedures around it. So then it's just a well-oiled machine. So when you do then put rocket fuel into the system, or in this case, you've got lots of kids into a classroom and there's lots of changes on the outside world, like we're experiencing today with AI, you're able to pivot and you're able to make changes and allow it to grow and then scale. And that's essentially, if we can try and get some of that back into the classroom, that will allow us to then bridge this gap between education and business.
And you can't forget the customer, right? So you have to be able to scale it without reducing the quality to the customer. And to me,
absolutely.
So one of the biggest problems we're seeing right now, and a lot of experts are talking about cognitive offloading or students using artificial intelligence to get through school. And Laura, you kind of talked about this earlier. How do I play chess? What's the least amount of work I have to do for this teacher to get through school? And school cannot be something that we just get through. It needs to be a space where children are expected to learn and think. And so when you're looking at schools, they often don't want to think of themselves as a business. But the best schools I know have standard operating procedures at scale, not based on one teacher, one excellent teacher, or maybe a few excellent teachers, but based on a collective expectation and a system designed with teachers and leaders together to ensure the students remain at the center and they are positively impacted.
And I would say, Meg, that you said where students are expected to learn, and the best schools that I've seen is where the students get to go to school. They get to go to this incredible place and do all these amazing things. This space is designed for humans to know how to thrive in the world. That's what it's about. That's why we designed these systems. So when a student is watching themselves grow and learn and how that process works, because the system gives them that information, gives them that support. That's the best that I can see and that I've seen in many of the places that I've worked in. But I just wanted to go back as the last point for me about the teacher trust that you mentioned earlier, Laura. Teachers have a lot handed to them. A lot of things are expected to do, and you this and you that. You know, we're going to do this differently. It can feel like being bombarded. And in what we're talking about here, teacher trust is a design requirement. If a teacher experiences this work as we're monitoring you, we're evaluating you, that's not going to work. It won't survive. Just as when teachers are saying we're monitoring you, watching you, see if you're using AI, that's unsustainable. What we have to do is change the language to we are monitoring. We're not monitoring. Let me correct that. We're helping teachers to see where thinking can become visible so that we know what the right support move can be to help everybody in this process. So it's not just show me work, let's have a look at, you know, what you used AI for, what you didn't. It's where do we see and how do we create those opportunities for student thinking? And then how do we create a system that supports that? And it's really important. I think this is really important that this is support. It's not surveillance, it's clarity, and it's not compliance theater, right? This is something that I think usability of what we're talking about depends on the trust and that we're protecting that trust.
Absolutely, Anna. And so this is where leadership matters, right? So leadership is essential in making sure that any type of new system is important and allowing for failure. As teachers are starting their journey of visible learning, some of them are starting it for the first time. Some of them were trained that completion was 100% the goal of school. So this idea of having proof points and looking for evidence inside assignments, while pedagogy for years and years and years has said that's high quality, many teachers have not been trained this way. So there needs to be flexibility. And there needs to be, we need to really work together with the teachers. And this is, leadership rhythm and next step is very, very important. Okay. The readiness map becomes implementation when leaders actually sit down and listen to the people that have completed it. Okay. Leaders must answer really important questions before ever implementing anything. Who owns the evidence after it appears? When will it be reviewed? And what decision follows the review? And as a leader, your responsibility is to make sure each one of those layers is answered, and maybe not perfectly, and allow for your team to answer it for a minute, see how it works, and revise those answers. What's so funny about schools is the plan, do, check, act. That cycle of inquiry is so amazing. And we already talked about this earlier. We're really good at planning. Okay. We're really good at doing. We can even check it through an assessment. But the part where schools often fall short and rely 100% on their staff is the act. What do we do with all of this information? How do we act and how do we ensure that the student is benefiting? So looking at this rhythm, right? So looking at 30 days, what is going to be, how am I going to implement this well in 30 days? Try one thing with maybe one team. What worked, what didn't work. And go to 60 days and see, where's the friction? Where are the points where do I need to bring in people that have done this before to help me? Be humble and honest about the roadblocks that you're experiencing because the students deserve it. Is there money? Is it monetary? How do you look at maybe using categorical or some one-time dollars to support you in additional professional development because you're noticing that your teachers are really struggling on how to adjust their assignments to show evidence of visible learning? And give yourself grace. After 90 days, have a plan for scalability. This isn't, you should have the answer in one day. This is the paperclip method, the atomic habits, the small little movements you as a leader do every single day to ensure that you are improving upon the day before. Those small movements, those moments of intent, where if you decide with your team that this is important and visibility is what you are going to be doing with your team, do it. Hold yourself accountable to it. Be open to listening to criticism and frustration. Make the conversation Socratic. Re-norm situations, accept the brutal facts, and work to change what you can change. So many times in education, we hear a barrier or a no or I can't. And so many times in my career as a leader, I never stopped at the first no. Because I found that if you kept being creative and you kept moving, that wall that you thought was really thick was really something you just needed a little chisel to get through, a little grit. And as you begin as a leader to see that work, I challenge you to look at this in chunks. It's not something you have to do day one. Take your time, be intentional, and be smart. Your manual proof moves start with the work. Why is this wonderful team here? Why do we put this group of educators together? Is because we believe in learning visibility, and we know that when you have 175 students on your caseload, a teacher being able to hold all of that information is almost impossible. And at scale, learning visibility is a big challenge. That's why it hasn't scaled across organizations unless you have specifically hired and have standard operating procedures. Nexus is an opportunity that IXR has created to scale learning visibility, working with your teachers to ensure that we are looking at and using proof points, supporting your teachers on aggregating that data and looking for trends, one next best move, one small micro movement that teacher can do with that student, and then coming back and looking, did that improve student behavior? Did that micro move increase my students' ability to think, to learn, to struggle, to synthesize? This is why we're here. But as we know, you've heard this every week, and this is a Megan thing. And it's something I've done in my career. It's about accountability. If you don't look at what you're going to do this week, by Friday, what commitment am I going to make to myself to start this work? So each week we've asked you to have a Friday commitment. Each week we've asked you to have a goal. I hope those of you with the grit and tenacity actually took us up on it. Hold yourself accountable to it. No one else is. The system's busy. There's a lot of things going on in education where it's easy to avoid some of the most important work. But what I would challenge you is make a commitment. By Friday, I will do what? Pick one of these. Ensure that you make a promise to yourself, to your classroom, to your team, to your district, that you can make positive change. And you do have our commitment handouts. We've had a commitment every week. You write it down, the chances of you actually doing it is like, I don't know, Colin probably has a statistic. It's like a millionfold in Meganisms. But for you to actually write down your goal, I will. And maybe I will go talk to my principal about this. Or I'm going to go speak to my superintendent about the importance of visibility because I am so concerned that AI is thinking for my children and completion is no longer enough. And there's always going to be issues. What I hear, and we can all kind of Socratically work, but we all are available. This team is diverse. And the reason why I love this group is because none of us enters this space with a lens that's similar. We all enter this space from a very unique place in public education with very unique and distinct paths. And people want to make a lot of excuses for barriers. It's true, and there are. But what I would say the most powerful people decide to live within their sphere of control and change what they can anyway. So if you are a teacher and you see this work being something that is super important to you, set a goal and do it. Talk to your leadership. Some people will say, well, my leadership won't buy in. Own what you can control. If you're a principal, or maybe your district doesn't have the capacity for this work, but you see this work as something vital for your campus, start this work anyway. Work with your teachers. Do the 30, 60, 90-day plan. If you are a district and maybe struggling with the board and superintendents, go slow. Have small little pilots happening. Prove it. Show the difference that you can make in small micro movements to then show the board the need for additional funding for work like this. This work is vital and extremely important in today's day and age, and it's answering the call that so many educators are frustrated to be. Educators don't want to be policing children's work. They don't. They want to be the facilitators of learning, and for the first time, we have a tool that's often smarter than any of us in the room. No longer is the teacher the one holding all the information. Children have access to something that they can ask questions after hours and get information faster than ever. So we have to begin changing. And at IXR, it's a small move. Can we get a side of thinking with that? Thank you for attending our 4 weeks. Thank you to this awesome team. Those of you who are interested in the scalability of learning visibility, what does that look like? What layer? How does this work? We'd love to talk to you. This is our mission. We want to protect the thinking behind the work. And that is the goal of this company. Thank you for attending today. And Colin, I'm bringing you back into the fold here as we close, but you guys do have your learning evidence map in your handbook. And the goal is not more data. It's making sure that you have evidence that students are thinking that you can actually use over time. And it's been a very fun 4 weeks. A lot to handle. We did a lot. We crammed a lot of information in these 4 weeks. So please scaffold it and make sure that you take the bits and pieces that really mean anything to you. But love to open up the floor for any final comments as on our 4th week on just the journey we took together with busy administrators, teachers, leaders in summer.
Absolutely. Thank you, Meg. Just for anyone that's watching this after the recording, so obviously we're doing this live at the moment, we will be doing a post wrap up of the 4, and we'll be doing a summary for each of the meetings. So we'll be sending out some cheat sheets that everyone can use. And as Megan said, that if any of you have any questions, wherever you are watching this, whether it's streamed or it's on our YouTube channel or any of the others, comment below the video and one of our team will get back in contact with you. We'd love to hear from you, whether you agree, disagree, if there's a topic that you would love us to also cover in future leadership series, or you want to present or be present on a Q&A, please get in contact with us. I'm just going to have a look at the questions if we've had any come in. I haven't seen any questions come in. I know there's one on the chat that was a little while back, Meg. I'm going to throw this one to you. And this was about advocating for a project management role in schools, but then it further goes on to talk about, it seems the question becomes, will the system be successful without a project management role supporting it? What are your thoughts about having project management roles in the schools to assist with teaching and in the classrooms, etc.?
Aren't teachers the best at project management? I remember, and I'm not getting paid for this. So I remember the first time when I was in school, we had a project management system called Monday.com that I brought in to my team, and it was unreal. The amount of structure and support that something as simple as that came into play. There were a ton of them out there to use. I would say when it's important, you inspect what you expect. So if it's a standard operating procedure that would work well within a project management system, that would help alleviate some of the mundane organizational work, the secretarial part of the job that becomes with a teacher, right? Educator, we have that part of our work, and leaders too. Then absolutely project management should be there. Having a human do that work, I think if the district can afford that, I'm all for it, but making sure that that role is defined. I'm never for a role that doesn't impact students positively. So what I would come back to the leadership is, okay, we have this idea. How do we want to scale it? Here's some tools that we believe would be successful. Who owns it? Who's helping make sure they're coaching the teachers in a safe place for people to fail? And what is realistic goal? What's the realistic accountability measure? So for example, Anna was talking about pick one thing. Well, great. So maybe across algebra, you're looking at one way that students are engaging in concepts and showing their thinking in algebra, because we know that they could just copy and paste their answers today. So how as a staff are you showing evidence of learning and thinking in algebra? Pick one way. And if the whole system and you're able to walk through classrooms and in learning, see that one way evident across the system, I would say that's success. And that's an example of one small move that a team can make collectively together. If you want to get sophisticated, that's going to be a larger lift. If you want to carry every student's learning journey, that's a larger lift. So would I think it'd be rad to have a project manager on a campus managing some of this work? Amazing. Realistically, I think oftentimes schools can't afford that level of support. It would need to be held on the shoulders of somebody who probably would wear multiple hats. But I do think project management on anything that matters whoever owns it can be the project manager. So it might be the principal, it might be a vice principal, it might be a dean, it might be a lead teacher, it might be a teacher on special assignment, it might be director or coordinator at the district level. And as long as their role is defined and they're the ones holding the system accountable for excellence, then it really works. I think definition is important in that answer.
I would even go to, we talked about the business world in trying to merge the two worlds together. Over the last almost 3 decades now of doing business, a lot of the projects that have actually failed because there either hasn't been a project manager, or B, there hasn't been a project management system in place. And the ones that have been able to then grow and scale have had both of those typically in place, so everyone is on the same page. And I think if we could bring some of those systems and tools more into the classroom, and Meg, Monday.com, I'm not getting paid either. We've used a lot of different project management systems. I'm a massive fan of mind mapping, visual mind mapping, and using Gantt charts. I've done it for the last 20 odd years. It just changes the way it's the geekiness, right? We know if we write it down that we're 10 to 20 times more likely to achieve that goal. And I think if we can bring some of those practices in the classroom, it would be amazing. But I'm also know that everyone is under pressure. Okay, everyone, that is a wrap. This is the 4th session, the last session in this leadership series. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I would like to challenge everyone and leave you with this thought. I want you to choose one signal, just one. And I then want you to protect it, then review it, and then decide which of those signals you can go from a growth phase into a scale phase. Thank you, everyone. Laura, Megan, Anna, and everyone else that's been here to join us today, and everyone that's watching, for all of our future people that are watching this. Welcome and thank you, and we look forward to connecting with you. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.